There's something that you don't know about me, and it has to do with why I started this business in the first place. A lot of things in here will surprise you and make you second guess a lot of what you think you know about online business. I knew that I had product market fit. I had tested an offer that people wanted. So when I had arrived at that point, I was ecstatic after a lifetime of being poor and struggling with money and not knowing what to do. I made one of the most important decisions that I've ever made in my life. Online courses are starting to take off. I'm seeing ads by Sam Ovens, by Danielle Leslie, saying online courses are a great way to make money. All you need is expertise and a topic. This wasn't something that I wanted to do forever. In Thailand, we filmed a documentary that was a dream project of mine. What we discovered were a series of stories about human trafficking and violations where people would flee from Myanmar out of a war zone into China or Thailand without legal paperwork, how we could potentially do something that could impact these people's lives. And I asked myself, how much of my life would I be willing to give this? I spent a lot of 2023 torturing myself. Should I have built this business? Welcome back to the Modern Advice Podcast. Today, you are in for a real treat. I'm going to share why I shut down my 7-figure business and decided to start again. In today's episode, I'm going to pull the curtain back and let you in on a really big secret that I have been keeping to myself for a very long time. In this episode, you're going to be shocked, you might cry, you'll laugh, and I'm sure that there will be a lot of things in here that will surprise you and make you second guess a lot of what you think you know about online business. So let's dive in. There's something that you don't know about me, and it has to do with why I started this business in the first place. I've told the story of my business evolution hundreds of times, but every time I've told the story, there's been a really important detail that I have omitted. And today I'm going to share that detail. Most of you know that mid-2018, I quit my corporate career in creative communications, also known as the advertising industry, to start a business as a life coach and in the field of personal development, transformation, not really knowing what I was doing, but keen to pursue the path of self-mastery, learn more about human behavior and wherever that was going to go. I just wanted to get out of working full-time. I wanted more space. I wanted to prioritize my creative projects. I wanted to pursue my writing, and I didn't have the time to do that working full-time. So I quit, threw caution to the wind, and didn't really have a plan. And it wasn't until December of 2019 that I finally arrived at a point where I had an offer, I had a niche, and I had a vision that I was ready to commit to. Whenever I tell this story, it always starts with me having just moved to Bali, just having had my first 10K month, and having the lunch that changed my life with an ex-partner's business coach at the time, who told me that if it wasn't really obvious, I should teach people how to write, that I should teach people content marketing. About a month after that, I launched my first group coaching program, my first online course called The Content Emporium. What I didn't tell you, what I didn't tell anyone, except for my close friends, is that during that first ever launch, when there was a frenzy of people who were so excited to work with me, who were thrilled at what I was launching. There was so much momentum, excitement, people joining a Facebook group, people following me on Instagram, joining a wait list for the next launch, me realizing, oh my God, for the first time, I'm really making money and I have more money than I need and I can start putting this in savings or I can invest it. I knew that I had product market fit. I had tested an offer that people wanted and it was predictable. I had a marketing system where I could deliver a masterclass. People were engaged, they were showing up, they were opting in, and people were buying the program. So for the first time, I had some sense of stability and viability in the business that I was about to embark upon and build properly. December 2019 was when I had finally, after many years, figured out how to make money. And this was a first for me because I knew that I could keep doing it. I could keep rinsing and repeating what I had just figured out. I could keep launching the same program. I could keep delivering the same content and teaching and coaching this thing. People wanted it. They needed it. And this is a really big part of business. For anyone that is on the business journey, once you've validated an offer, from there, it's just marketing systems and scale. The hardest part about starting a business is that first part when you're going from 0 to 1 and you can create an offer that people really, really want, and you can deliver it and deliver the result or the transformation that people really, really want, what you've advertised. If you can get to that point and you get to, 1, then you can repeat that again and again. And that's really the turning point. So when I had arrived at that point, I was ecstatic. I was thrilled. Finally, I'd figured something out that was really going to change my life after a lifetime of being poor and struggling with money and not knowing what to do and how to figure it out and kind of always feeling, like I don't know how I'm going to get what I want in life. I made a decision. A very important decision, one of the most important decisions that I've ever made in my life. Because up until that point, I had always known what I wanted to do. The problem is that I could never figure out how to monetize it. I didn't grow up with money or connections. I didn't grow up in the land of possibility. And I didn't know how I was ever going to make it as a successful creative person, where I was very, very specific about what I wanted to create, the art that I wanted to write and make. And I wasn't willing to compromise on that. I didn't want to be a ghostwriter. I didn't want to be a copywriter. I didn't want to be a videographer. I didn't want to do commercial videos for other people. I didn't want to work in my field, but close enough, but not quite doing what I really wanted. I wasn't willing to do that because I knew that there would be a pain associated with me being close and that it would kind of ruin the process for me. And I knew that because for a long time, I was very passionate about photography. I went traveling when I was 19 for about 8 months, backpacking, living abroad, and really learning the art of photography after even taking some classes at uni. And then I came back to Melbourne and I'd gotten better, after 8 months of practice. And one of my best friends at the time saw a photo that I had taken of a local fisherman during sunset in El Nido, Palawan in the Philippines. And it looked like something that could have been in National Geographic. And he said to me, Phoebes, you need to pursue this photography thing. You are really good at it. And I think that you could do it for real. Like you could be a photographer and you should make it your career. And I did. I, for years, pursued photography, worked as an assistant in studios. I worked as an event photographer, a nightclub photographer, eventually making my way up to wedding photography. I did a couple of commercial shoots. And by the end of that, several years in, I was so bitter and resentful that I could no longer pick up a camera or touch one again. Working in the photography industry ruined my love and passion for street photography, for portraiture. And I didn't want to make that same mistake with writing and filmmaking. I didn't want to spend all of my days writing for someone else things that were boring, that I didn't care about. I didn't want to spend my days shooting commercial videos that I drained my soul and then get to a point where I was like, I can't be around this anymore. It was too sacred to me. So I, for many years, tried to figure out how I could make money doing something else that could support my creative vision. Fast forward, after several attempts at starting an agency, trying to get into tech startups, realizing that I was not an engineer, I was never going to be an engineer, and I probably was never going to be a successful tech startup founder. And I arrive at a point in time where online courses are starting to take off. I see an ad in 2018 by Danielle Leslie that says you can start your own online course. And I did it. And now I'm making $20,000 a month from my online course through Instagram. And then I'm seeing these ads by Sam Ovens saying the same thing. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing and learning and realizing that maybe online courses are a great way to make money from anywhere, relatively passive. You're on the beach, like once you've made the course once, that's it, whoop, and then it's done. You're making money all the time. And so I'm like, well, you don't really need any startup costs. All you need is expertise and a topic. And I spent a really long time trying to figure out what my expertise was for a lot of the end of 2018. Like, what could I teach on? What could I teach on? So when I finally had that moment where, the light reached through and Caleb said to me, you should teach content marketing and writing, I was like, this is it. Everything from that point seemed really straightforward. This was my opportunity to finally make money. But I also knew that this wasn't something that I wanted to do forever. When I realized what was about to happen, when I realized the journey that I was about to embark upon into building and growing something, I remember the moment so distinctly. I sat in my room in my villa in Bali that I shared with 2 other people. And I meditated. I meditated on the next couple of years because I knew I was at a very important juncture in my life where I could keep trying to make art and I could keep struggling financially and I could keep fighting to work with creatives and do something that was maybe closer to what I wanted. Maybe being a travel influencer and creating travel content was closer to what I really wanted to do. I had a lot of friends that were doing that. And I questioned, is this closer? I would be writing, I would be filmmaking kind of, but not really. It's close, I don't know. And then I had this online course thing. At this point in time, I had just come back to Bali from a 1-week trip in Thailand, which was very significant. I had a videographer friend. The 2 of us flew to Chiang Mai and we filmed a documentary that was a dream project of mine. I didn't know exactly what we're going to get ourselves into. I just knew that I wanted to get close to the border of Myanmar and Thailand and that there were indigenous tribes along that border zone. And I wanted to learn more about them. When we got there, we uncovered the most incredible and unexpected stories. And there's no way that we would have known any of this if we didn't just dive right in and go. So once we arrived in Pai and we had all of our, camera gear with us and we sort of were sitting at cafes and planning and preparing and trying to figure out where we were going, we're telling people, we're making a documentary, we're looking for these indigenous groups of people. And then all of a sudden people were like, oh, I can help. There was also a Facebook group, Pai Digital Nomads, Chiang Mai Digital Nomads. And I was posting in those groups as well, telling people what we were doing. And all of a sudden everyone was getting on board and helping and giving us pointers and tips and introducing us to other people. And it was the most incredible week. What we discovered in that week were a series of stories about human trafficking and violations where people would flee from Myanmar out of a war zone into China or Thailand without legal paperwork. And then people would take advantage of those refugees and they would give them jobs in factories or local businesses, have them working for free for about a month. And then when they would kind of bang on the door and be like, hey, where's my paycheck? I need money to live. They would then call the cops and send them right back into the war zone. And that was happening again and again and again. And there's nothing that they could do about it because they didn't have any of their legal paperwork. They weren't legally allowed to be going into China or Thailand from Myanmar. There were some people that had made the border crossing successfully 3 times and kept being taken back. I want to reiterate like how hard it is to cross the border when there are bombs in the ground everywhere and you don't know when you're going to step on something, like mines in a field. People trying to go from their house to someone else's house, and it is literally one of the most terrifying war zones. We ended up finding a really incredible elephant sanctuary run by a woman from New York who was living in Thailand, and her husband had successfully fled from Myanmar. We interviewed him, we interviewed her. Most of the people working at her sanctuary were refugees from Myanmar. At the end of that week, Jay, my videographer, and I was so filled up by what we had discovered and how we could potentially do something that could impact these people's lives. And I just said to him, I want to keep making stuff like this. This is what I want to do. And that was 1 month before my course success. And so I was very close to, would it be possible for me to kind of keep making these types of films? Would it be possible for me to keep finding these types of stories and doing what some of my friends or colleagues were doing, where they'd be saving money, and then, with a little bit of money that they had, they would go out and they would kind of do what they really wanted to do, their creative dream work, and then sort of run out of money again, then try and save it up again. And maybe you'd be lucky to do one of those projects a year. And I thought to myself, I'm not the type of person that does balance well. I'm not the type of person that wants to keep struggling in that way where I'm not going all in on one thing in particular, but I'm kind of half in on everything. And the decision that I made that night in December of 2019 was to go all in on the course thing, to go all in on the business, because I knew that I could make it work if I put all of my energy and my effort into it. And I asked myself, how much of my life would I be willing to give this? How much time can I really devote to making this business work before I cark it and go, I can't do this anymore because I need to be pursuing my art and I need to be telling these stories? And the answer was 4 years, intuitively. And so I said, okay, 4 years I think is enough time to try and give this a good run where I can hopefully save a really decent amount of money for the future. And maybe if I try really hard, maybe I can make $1 million like that Danielle girl did. And she did it in 4 years. It wasn't going to be easy, but I figured if I could make $1 million, and I could probably save a couple $100,000, and then I'd have some money for my art. So when I started my business, the promise that I made myself was that I'd give it 4 years, in the hope that at the end of that journey, I'd have something that would create some kind of nest egg for me to then go and pursue what I really wanted to do with a sense of safety and security and without that constant struggle. I didn't want to live that way. There were people that asked me, why did you build a business that was unsustainable? Or why did you do this if it's not what you really wanted? And the answer is, I made a decision to spend 4 years making personal sacrifices so that I could spend the rest of my life without needing to. For anyone that's new to me and maybe doesn't know about the business journey that I've been on, I'll catch you up and give you a bit of an overview. So over the last 4 and a bit years, I built an online course business that has generated around $4 million USD in revenue. About 30,000 followers on Instagram, an email list of 35,000, an article in Entrepreneur Magazine, lots of recognition and accolades from the industry, colleagues, people. I've been recognized in most mastermind rooms and events that I walk into. I've been recognized and stopped on the street. I've built something that a lot of people would envy. A lot of people would say, wow, like you've been so successful in this, like why would you shut it down? Why would you dissolve it? And I think it's really important for me to tell this story because for the last year, I have been in so much internal angst and turmoil keeping this to myself, because for the last year and a bit, it's been so painful for me to keep moving when I reached my point of I'm nearing the end. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the journey of building. I want to talk to you about what I set out to do, what I learned along the way, what went wrong, a lot of the misconceptions when it comes to building an online business, and how I arrived at this place. I learned the process of building an online course because it seemed like the fastest, most efficient way to move towards financial freedom that I was looking for without the big startup costs. It's not that I dreamed of being a coach and that I dreamed of having a coaching business. I was like, I want a course business because I'm seeing ads from people that are on the beach and they're talking about passive income and, I think that I can do this, right? So I committed to it 100%. After my first launch, I got stuck in Lisbon in Portugal during the beginning of the pandemic. And I got stuck with my now ex-partner. So living with him, and we were initially just platonic friends, and this is someone that was a cash millionaire that knew so much about money and investing and had a hedge fund. I learned so many things that I previously had no idea about. This was like winning the lottery, in terms of kind of getting a free financial education. So during that time that we lived together and we were housemates, one of the important things that he taught me was the concept of cash flow, which is, obviously that's a thing in life, but there's this game called Cashflow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki. And if you don't know who Robert Kiyosaki is, he's the guy that wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. The Cashflow Quadrant is essentially this concept where you have 4 different archetypes that you move through to become financially free. And so the first archetype is the employee. Most of us start out as the employee, right? We work for someone else. We are limited by time and money, we're trading time for money, but we're also not in charge of how much we make. We're not in charge of the activities that we're doing, so there's the least amount of freedom there as an employee. The next quadrant, you are self-employed. So when you move from employee to self-employed, you get to dictate how much money you make. You get to sort of determine your rates. You get to determine what kind of work you're doing. So there's more freedom there. There's more sovereignty and autonomy. However, you're still trading time for money as someone that's self-employed. So you're still limited. You can make more money, but you're limited. You're still capped by how much you can make as a self-employed person. So you'd be self-employed if you were a copywriter, if you were a photographer, and you only have so many hours in the day, right? And you're going to eventually get tired and you kind of can't keep going. So you're capped. The next transition, and this is the biggest transition for most people, well, if you're on the business journey, this is the biggest transition for most people, is moving from self-employed to business owner. That's a really big one because when you go from self-employed to business owner, you're building systems and you're building marketing systems, you're building a scalable offer, you're building out team members. It's all about systems. It's all about scale. And so when you become a business owner, you have IP or a system that can ideally essentially work without you. And so you then have time freedom. So when you're a business owner, you should have a relative amount of time freedom, right? Because the systems, the team, all of that should be working for you. The final transition in the game of winning life, according to my ex and Robert Kiyosaki, is making the transition from business owner to investor. When you make this transition, you have money working for you, right? So we're going from having systems working for you to having money working for you, meaning that your investments, your money is making more money. And that's where you're completely free. Everything is passive. Everything is not even necessarily automated. It's just that your investments are making more money and accruing more wealth. So again, a lot of people struggle from making that transition from business owner to investor because they're very, very different mindsets. And it's very hard for an entrepreneur to come out of their business and actually get to the point where they are not involved, right? There's a really big ego journey there of like, oh, I'm not the one that's doing this. I don't need to be doing this. I'm not at cause. I'm not creating the result, right? And so if you're someone that's still going through this transition of needing to be needed, then actually getting to the point where things are working without you and, you're no longer doing something and then creating a result, but things are just simple as they are, it's a really big thing because a lot of entrepreneurs will become very addicted to the results that they're creating, to the validation that it brings. And a lot of the time, if you are a successful investor, people don't necessarily know about it. Like there's not necessarily people on social media rewarding you for that. You might not even necessarily have like a public image, so behaviorally, there are less things that are being reinforced as a successful investor than there would be if you were a successful business owner, for example. So that journey is something that was communicated to me. And I was like, oh my God, if I can just learn investing, if I can finally get to the point where I have these passive assets. And you can invest in businesses that you don't own, that you're not working in, but that are producing, they're pretty automated and they're producing things like you could buy an Amazon business, like there are businesses that will sell random things on Amazon, like spatulas and these crazy niches, and you're just like, cool, I own an Amazon business that sells spatulas and we make, $5,000 a month completely automated and I don't do anything. And I have a lot of colleagues that have those types of businesses. And they're millionaires and they do really well and they don't really work much and they just travel and whatever, they're free. And so I was kind of like, okay, cool. If I can just learn how to do this, then with my free time, I get to go and be an artist and pursue my art. So I was like, cool, my business, my avenue to arriving there is courses. And that is ultimately what I was trying to figure out how to build. Now, as I started the journey of building my business, I learned a very harsh and brutal truth, which is that the marketing campaign that you see online where people are like, passive income, build a funnel, blah, blah, blah. It's not as easy and as straightforward as just building a funnel and then turning it on, having your ads running, and then thinking that you can just retire on a beach. The journey of growing and scaling my business was pretty brutal. It was a very rude awakening for someone that was purely, in honesty, motivated by money. It was very hard for me to endure that for so many years. And I needed a lot of therapy. I did a lot of therapy. A lot of the money that I made, I spent on coaching and therapy to maintain my sanity, because when you are extrinsically motivated and when you are pursuing money, it's one of the fastest ways to arrive at burnout. That is a really big thing in and of itself, which I think could be a future episode. And I would love to bring on one of my best friends, Carly, who actually specializes in burnout. That was her master's thesis, to talk to you all about the relationship between extrinsic motivation, acceptance, resistance, and burnout. It's really fascinating. If you're interested in learning more about it now, there's a book called Drive by Daniel Pink, and he talks about these really incredible experiments that were done in the 70s by Edward Deci and Henry Harlow. We'll talk about that on a future episode. So phase 1, I have the course, I've launched it, I saved some money so that I can then enter phase 2, which is to build the funnel. I joined a $10,000 mastermind with the promise of, build your funnel, scale it to 1 million. I did everything that was outlined in the program. There were 130 people in this mastermind. I was probably one of maybe 5 to 8 out of 130 people that actually built the thing, did a live webinar every single week for 12 weeks, refined everything. I refined the shop rates. I refined, the slides in the webinar, sales page, emails, everything was tested meticulously. And I did actually get the webinar funnel to be profitable. So I had technically achieved the goal, right? I had an ads manager managing the ads. But when you take into account that you're paying for yourself, you're paying an ads person, you're paying, a technical assistant or integrator operations person, you're paying for the ads. When you have all of those expenses, you're then managing this balance between, okay, well, I have a profitable funnel, but it's not really paying for all of the business expenses. And so eventually I ran out of cash and then I needed to try something else. And I was like, hey, this thing didn't really work. Like they said that you could just scale it and then that you would have $1 million business. And I thought that it was just as straightforward as that. Build the funnel, just keep spending more money on ads and then eventually you'll just make $1 million, right? But what they don't talk to you about, this was one of the first things that I got really angry about, was profit margins. So it's like you can have $1 million business and not have any profit margins, right? And if you want to get there really quickly and scale really fast, you are sacrificing profit for growth. So this was one of my first very important lessons. If you want to grow fast, you are sacrificing profit. There are only two modes in business, profit mode and growth mode. Growth mode is when you're scaling. It's when you're focusing on brand building. It's when you're focusing very specifically on acquiring more audience. So your main activities are going to be on hiring lots of team members, making sure that you're removing yourself as much as possible and gaining as much of your time back, that you can deliver to more clients so that you can essentially sell or sign more clients so that you can make even more money, right? So in order to fulfill to many people, you need to have a huge team of support coaches or people that you're delivering to. And at the height of my business, I would have like 300 clients at a time that I was delivering to with a multitude of support coaches, maybe 4 or 5 support coaches. But then you also have team. You also need to spend money on ads. And so when your expenses are that high and you're growing, you're putting a lot of money into ads. You're putting a lot of money into trying to kind of beat the competition and people in your niche that might be doing what you do. And so if you want to come out as number one or one of the people who are at the top of the ladder, you need to be spending more on ads. You need more eyeballs. You need that competitive advantage. And so, people who come out with these like 8-figure businesses, they have spent the money to get there. Like people like Marie Forleo, Amy Porterfield, James Wedmore, Jeff Walker, anyone that has become the dominant leader in their industry, they've spent a lot of money on ads to become that person where they're top of mind. You always think of them. Like I remember having conversations with Scott Olford about how much money he would spend just on brand awareness. And it was like $1 million a year. So that when you think of scale, you think Scott Olford. You're like, yep, Scott Olford. Scott's the scale guy, and that costs money. And so when I realized and learned that you actually needed to invest this much in order to build this audience and have that kind of level of business, I was like, well, then that doesn't help me achieve my goals, because my goals are to have savings. And then with those savings, I go and do my art thing and I get to be an artist. So what's the point of building this business with all this audience and all this money if I don't get to keep any of it at the end of the day? And I think that this is a really big thing that so many people learn, is this lesson around profit margins. Like, when does your business actually even become profitable? So the other mode in business is profit mode. Profit mode is something that you can start with. You don't necessarily have to go from growth to profit mode and like change levers. You can be profitable early on, but it's a lot more of a slow burn if you want to be profitable from the early days. So being profitable from the early days looks like sustainable marketing strategies where you have low team, like almost no team, and you're doing more things yourself. Because remember, everything is always a trade-off. So if you're hiring someone to do something for you and you're getting your time back so that you can do more delivery, then you're paying them to do marketing, right? So you can have a whole marketing team, which at one point I did. I had a copywriter, I had a social media manager, I had a designer, I had everybody doing everything. And when you're paying that many people to do that many things for you and you're not doing it yourself, yeah, of course the business isn't going to be profitable, right? Like getting the business to a point where you're actually making a lot of profit is very challenging. Most people never get there. Most people never actually get to the point where the business is profitable. They'll be lucky if they can pay themselves, honestly. And I said in another podcast once that for years I paid myself $3,000 a month and everything else either went back into the business or it went into paying my contractors. And there were months where I paid my contractors more than I paid myself. And I actually, when I shared that publicly, I had some of my contractors reach out to me and messaged me saying, I had no idea. There were months where I sent you invoices for $5,000 or $6,000 and you were paying me more than you were paying yourself and you were eating ramen. And I was like, yeah, because when you're a founder, you need to make personal sacrifices. And they were like crying and they had no idea. They just thought, that I had all this money. And I was like, no, dude, like when you have a business, the business generates revenue. That's not your personal money. Like you're sitting there learning accounting for the first time. Imagine being an artist and being like, oh, I'm learning accounting. I don't know what to do, and you're just kind of trying to figure it out, right? And it's all a balancing game between expenses and profit. That's literally the game of business. Managing and juggling these two things and these two levers where you're trying to get the profit up and the expenses down without compromising integrity, without burning yourself out. And that is the simplest way of describing business. It's those two levers. So if you happen to focus on growth mode for a period of time, and this is what a lot of people do who are at the top, they will build their audience, they'll build their brand, they'll build their reputation. And after they've spent a lot of money on ads and on awareness and growing their audience and acquiring a big email list, then they make the switch from growth mode into profit mode. And that's when things get to be decent. And so generally speaking, the amount of money that you need to spend on advertising, you might be at a break even, or you might need to go into the red. And so again, this is just a lot of really advanced accounting. It's kind of having a sense of understanding how deep into the red can I go, or am I willing to go to win the market, acquire this audience so that I can then make the transition from growth into profit, where I can then have this audience of maybe 100,000 people or 20,000 people or 500,000 people on my email list that I can then sell to once I get rid of my marketing team, once I turn all these ads off, and I then have people that I can sell to. That's the game. Understanding that is probably one of the most valuable things that you'll ever learn if you want to do this business thing, these two modes. So for a lot of people, if they're in active growth, they're not really profitable for maybe like 4 or 5 years. And then they turn everything off, they scale their team back, and then they're finally profiting. When I found that out, I was like, okay, this is how it works. And I need to make money. And so because I'm stubborn and my Mars is in Taurus and I'm like, there's got to be another way, I tried to figure out how I could somehow balance growth mode and profit mode, because there are people that will do that and they will have their own unfair advantages. And I didn't have those same unfair advantages. I didn't have the technical skills or abilities to do everything myself and keep my expenses lean enough where I could essentially be at a break even for 4 years. I couldn't afford to do that, and some people can. So I was like, all right, well, how can I balance these two things and be somewhere in the middle where I'm growing simultaneously and maybe I'm not crazy profitable, but maybe I have some profit and it's kind of enough for me to funnel away. And it was in 2021 that I really developed a launching system that allowed me to strike that balance between the two, where I was doing a lot of the marketing myself. And if I did hire people out, then I was sacrificing profit. But essentially, by not having the funnel model, the evergreen model, and by having the live launching model, I was a lot more profitable. Now in 2022, I tweaked that again. And I was like, okay, cool. I have a launch system that works. I know that whenever I put $1 into this system, I get somewhere between $8 to $13 back, which is really great. Like that is an excellent ROAS. For context, if you have a webinar funnel, you would be lucky to be at a break even with a webinar funnel. Like you might have a funnel that maybe produces like a 1.2 or a 1.5x ROAS over time, which means it's a little bit profitable. For every $1 that you put in, you get $1.20 back, right? So to have a launch system where when I spend $1, I'm getting anywhere from 8 to 13 back is really, really solid. Like I built an excellent system. The problem with that is that it was very, very time and energy heavy on me. And so in order for that to be at that profit margin that I wanted, I needed to be the one that was writing all of the copy. I needed to be the one that was doing the majority of the designs. I needed to be the one that was selling in the DMs. I needed to be the one that was, obviously on the webinar, talking to everyone and, telling everyone all about the things and hey, this is my program, this is my offer, this is my course. I needed to be the one that was posting everything on social media. And so you can imagine how much work that is for one person that's doing the job of about 4 different people, but I'm not paying 4 people, I'm doing it all myself, right? So essentially, I could be paying $12,000 for 4 team members, but I'm saving that $12,000 per month and doing it myself. So of course there's more profit. But I'm then going from a month or 2 months of preparation and marketing for a launch to then going into delivery. And yes, I can have support coaches do a lot, but it's still shared responsibility where again, I tested how much can I have support coaches deliver and how much can I deliver to get the right ratio where the clients are happy, where people, are getting results. And it is this kind of right balance again, because I've seen people offload everything to support coaches and then clients aren't happy and then your refund rate is high, right? And it's like, it's important to understand like what role support coaches can play in your coaching business or whatever. And to also be really clear on like, you need to be there because it's your brand, like you need to be doing the fulfillment because people are buying you. And so support coaches can support, but you still need to be there. And I had mastered the system. I'd mastered the balance between the profit and the growth, right? Where I was like, cool, like I am acquiring audience and I'm also profiting at the same time. But remember, there's always a trade-off, always. And you need to decide what that trade-off is going to be. And I decided that I was willing to trade my energy. And I was like, I'm willing to be tired for a couple of years if it means that I can stack this money and put it aside. You can never truly have it all. You're always going to be sacrificing something, and it's up to you to decide what it is that you want to sacrifice. And I made that decision very clearly. I was like, I don't accept this reality. I don't accept that reality. What about this? And I'm willing to do this. And it was reasonably sustainable for me. Like I wasn't burnt out and dying. I was just like, I'm doing the job of 4 to 5 different people and it's a lot, but I can do it. It's okay. Like I'm happy, like I have most of what I want. It was a sacrifice that I was willing to make. So that's profit versus growth mode. And ultimately, like if you can kind of understand that business is always going to be a balance of those levers, like that is really going to serve you. Then 2023 rolls around and I had been doing this online launching thing for a while, right? So at the beginning of 2023, I'm 3 years into my 4-year commitment to myself. I was working one-on-one with Scott Olford as my business mentor. And if you don't know who Scott is, he is a really established, well-known person in the online business space. He's a bit of a celebrity and he comes with a celebrity price tag. I hired him because I wanted to know what I didn't already know about online business. There were a multitude of reasons why I hired him. I wanted to work with someone at that level of success. And I really wanted that feeling of knowing that I had deserved that I had accomplished something that allowed me to go and do that for myself. And I wanted to learn what he knew about acquiring businesses, about being an investor, and about having equity share in businesses. And so it wasn't just about mentoring or strategy or coaching. It was really about that financial piece of transitioning into that investor archetype, because he was doing a lot of that. Like he, at the time, I think had equity in 30 different companies as a partner. And I was like, cool, like this is something that, would give me the financial freedom to be an artist. And so, he knows how to do that and I want to learn how to do that. A lot of our conversations in 2023 were about me saying, I'm exhausted with doing the job of 4 people and I don't want to be the marketer anymore. But also knowing that me being the marketer and doing the job of 4 people was the reason why the business was profitable, because if I wasn't doing it, the business would not have been profitable. And so I was stuck in a really hard place for so much of 2023 where I was like, I can't keep doing this anymore. And I use up so much of my creative energy and my creative juice writing copy and creating content. I don't have any creative juice at the end of the day for me and any of my books or any of the things that I want to write for me and for the world. And I need to replace myself as the marketer. I don't want to be the marketer anymore. This is not an identity that I want to hold. I was sad for so much of 2023. And I was like, would it be possible for me to find a marketing team and actually still maintain profit, considering that I hadn't been able to do that in the past and I had tried? Would it be possible for me to hire someone at the executive level to help me even alleviate some of those duties, maybe a co-CEO or maybe a CMO? And I tried yet again. I've tried everything to build sustainability in something where I had so much momentum. At the beginning of 2023, I brought on someone for an executive leadership position with the intention of taking the human design for business arm that I had built and potentially turning it into its own separate company, its own separate brand, turning it into a school. We bought the domains, we set everything up. We had team meetings, we had launch meetings. I had a lot of momentum with that human design for business thing that I had. There were a lot of people that were like, yeah, this could really be something big. That could be an $8 million business. Like if you built a certification and you started teaching people and certifying them in your method. And the thing is, that would have taken another 3 to 4 years. And at this point, I was 3 years into my 4-year promise to myself. And I was like, I don't know if I can give another 3 or 4 years of my life to maybe building something that could be worth $8 million later. Like I just don't think that I can give that much more time to this quest of becoming financially free. I'm already pretty tired. I'm already kind of sad, And, the person that I brought in and that kind of attempt at doing that whole separating it out and making it its own thing, I probably gave about 4 months into that project of trying to make it its own thing when I realized that the person that I had brought on wasn't really the right fit and it wasn't at the experience level to be able to take that and run with it and grow it without me needing to be more involved than I was willing to be. So again, it's a trade-off. Everything's trade-off. You're like, okay, I can do this and I have all of the opportunities and I have all of the cards. I've got this great hand of cards, but in order to play this, I'm going to need to play. Am I willing to play? And that's the question that you always need to be asking yourself is really, what am I willing to do? And I wasn't willing to go down that road. And so I did one more launch of that program. I was willing to do that, stack that cash, but I wasn't willing to keep building that. One of the things that shocked me the most in the business journey was realizing how much time goes into marketing. It was really funny. I remember when I had a full-time job and I was daydreaming about when I would have my own business and how much free time I would have for reading all the books that I've always wanted to read, all of the travel that I always wanted to do, all of the writing that I was going to be able to do with all my free time when I finally worked for myself. And the rude awakening was realizing that it's actually 80% of your time that you spend on sales and marketing. Most people don't realize that. And they go, I really, why is business so hard? And it's like, because you probably want to do the thing that you're really passionate about. Like if you're a chef, you want to be in the kitchen. You don't want to be figuring out how to get people into the restaurant. If you're a coach or if you're, doing some kind of facilitation work, you probably love psychology. You probably love talking to people and helping people. And you don't want to be sitting there on social media for 5 hours a day. Of course you're tired. Marketing is 80% of the job of having a business. And you didn't know that when you signed up for this. I didn't know it either. The difference is that once I'd made that commitment, I was willing to see it all the way through to the end of the 4-year finish line. And so I ended up learning all of the marketing skills that I needed to learn. I ended up becoming the whole marketing team and doing 4 people's jobs for several years because I was like, I'm here, I've made this commitment to myself, and I'm on the road, and I also had that opportunity cost, like the sunken opportunity cost kind of fallacy in my mind where I was like, I've already given so much of my time to this, if I stop now, like it will have all been for nothing. If I just keep going, like I'll get there eventually, should just keep going. And eventually I arrived at a place where I made some really great financial decisions for myself. I spent a lot of 2023 torturing myself, wondering if I had made the right decisions, wondering if I had betrayed my own authenticity, because the majority of the world didn't know why I did this. People probably thought that my intention from the very beginning was to build a coaching business or be a coach or be some kind of like, I don't know, whatever it is that you think I do. Everyone has a different perception and projection about who they think I am and what they think I do and why I do it. And I got to the point where I realized that people saw me differently to how I saw myself because of the outward image of the business that I had built, and that my business wasn't necessarily a true reflection of my deepest, most core self. And that's not to say that it was inauthentic or that it was a lie. I don't think that I'm capable of doing something that's inauthentic. I think that in a world governed by capitalism, that what I built was the closest thing to what I could ever do and make money in a way that is aligned to who I am, my gifts, and what is meaningful to me. If there was a more aligned way, I would have found it and I would have done it. But that question, wondering if I was inauthentic, wondering if I had somehow compromised or prostituted myself in some way, that drove me crazy for so much of last year. I really questioned myself, like, should I have done this? Should I have built this business? People don't see me. People don't even know me. People don't know what I really care about. I remember there were times when people would respond to certain stories on Instagram or people would comment on ads and, they would just comment their projections, right? And that's what happens when you have a lot of visibility. People will just say what they think and they don't actually know you. People don't know that I'm an activist. People don't know that the art that I want to make is for the greater good of humanity, that I want to completely transform and influence the shape of media for people to wake up and transform and heal. And that I think that the greatest impact that I could possibly have in this world is through storytelling at a global scale. People don't know that I want to do social impact projects in underdeveloped regions and countries. People don't know any of that about me. People just lumped me into this category with every other business coach and entrepreneur that was driven by money, because how could they possibly know? I never told them. And so for such a long time, I sat there in the pain of feeling like people didn't really know who I was and why I was doing anything for the greater vision of what I had to somehow progress further. And I finally arrived here. And it is so, so therapeutic to be sharing this with you after all of this time. To finally be releasing this. And to give you the opportunity to get to know the real me and see who I really am. So I think a really good question is, would you do it all again? And the answer is yes. Because the truth is, I don't think that there's any way I would have been able to create an automated, systemized, scalable business that I could just run for 2 days a week without that business being my whole life. When you make the decision to build a business, you can't do it half-assed. It's not something that you can do on the side as a hobby. If you want it to truly work, you need to go all in for a solid amount of time. And for me, I gave it 110% 4 years straight. And I think that what I was able to accomplish in that time is pretty outstanding. I don't think that there's any way I could have done anything any differently to achieve a better result. Like I've said several times throughout this episode, there is always a trade-off. By scaling at the specific speed and level of aggression that I did, I achieved very specific things. And if I, quote, built a sustainable business and grew slower in a way that was maybe a little bit more aligned from the beginning, I wouldn't have the brand that I have today. I wouldn't have the network that I have today. To be honest with you, I probably wouldn't even have some of the friendships that I have today, which are one of the best things to have ever come out of this whole journey. Because of the brand that I built, I have an infinite sea of incredible opportunities that present themselves to me at any given time. For example, I woke up this morning to a text asking if I was available to do a keynote talk at the Ritz-Carlton in Miami on branding, storytelling, and social media in a couple months. I've had 3 multi-million dollar founders approach me for CMO consulting in exchange for equity in their companies. These are the tangibles that came from the brand that I built in 4 years. Then there's the financial side of things. There's this really tacky saying, and it's be willing to live a few years how most people won't, so that you can live the rest of your life how most people can't. In the context of business, that is purely financial. And it is about, having the money to do whatever you want and the lifestyle that you want. But in the context of me being an artist and looking at my colleagues who are artists and maybe came from a similar position to where I was and having similar dreams and visions that I have, there is a lot to be said for having a certain amount of capital behind you as an artist to fulfill things and the projects that you really want to create. For example, last year when I spontaneously, very last minute with 3 weeks of pre-production, called my producer in Berlin and said, can you fly to LA and can we make a documentary about mold and Cambo and see if this experiment works? Can we make a pilot episode? I funded all of that with my course money and we were able to pull that off in 3 weeks. And there's no way that I would have ever been able to do that without this business. There's no way I would have been able to pay the so much, multi-six figures, that I've paid for my writing career, for the many incredible mentors that I've hired to help me develop my writing and my storytelling abilities and my creative career, and the publishing for my books, multiple books that I have that are about to be published in the next 2 years. I've invested so much into my creative projects and they haven't blossomed yet, but they will. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't made this commitment in December of 2019 to go all in on this. Last year, when I was in my angst, I hunted down 2 creatives whose work I really admired. One of them was a documentary filmmaker who had an incredible film premiere at South by Southwest. I bolted down to the front of the stage at the end of that screening to shake his hand, introduce myself, ask him some questions about production. I was like, love this film, so great. This is exactly the kind of stuff that I want to make. How did you fund it? This was clearly a very expensive film to make. How did you pay for it? How much of it did you pay yourself? What did you do? What did you do financially, right? How did you make money as a creative to be able to fund this thing? And we ended up exchanging contact information, emailed him a few times back and forth, was able to end up getting on a Zoom call with him and even just sort of getting a bit of mentoring from him. This was someone that was a journalist for Rolling Stone. This was someone who had this incredible career doing a lot of journalism in war-torn countries, who I really looked up to. And I felt a little bit embarrassed. I was like, my public brand is that I have this course business, but really I'm a journalist and really I'm a filmmaker. And I just have been trying to create some financial stability for myself. And, I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed about that, right? I was embarrassed about capitalism and that I had taken that road. And I was really shocked and surprised when he turned to me and said, I spend 4 or 5 years with my creative partner, his producer, at their day jobs with their freelance work, saving 10 to 20% of their paychecks and putting it into a jar. And then after 4 or 5 years, they'll have enough to basically pursue one of their dream projects. And he's like, if you can create financial freedom and stability for yourself doing something else, he's like, then, you're going to put yourself in a much stronger position than anyone else. And he's like, and you should absolutely do that because it's not fun to do it the regular way. And he applauded me. He was like, yeah, he's like, you're in a really strong position, especially at 31. And I was like, wow, I wouldn't have expected that. And a week later, I was on the phone to an incredible filmmaker who does these amazing, amazing short films, whose videography and cinematic talent and editing I really admire. And I spoke to him. And I was also embarrassed and said, I'm a creative, but if you look at my Instagram, it's going to be a lot of marketing stuff. And he said the same thing that the other guy said. And he was like, that's great. He's like, I spend most of my time doing films for tourism boards and, I don't really get to do my own creative projects because I don't have the time or the money, and maybe I can do one creative project a year. And that's most of my creative friends. They are limited by time and money. And maybe if they're lucky, they can do a project after a lot of waiting, right? But they're still on that kind of endless hamster wheel of compromise. So a lot of this journey for me has been this massive sacrifice and this ongoing battle of being like, this is who I really am. This is what I really want to do. And I'm making these sacrifices for this period of time in order to create what I really want. My business wasn't really profitable until its third year, which was 2022. I invested a lot of those profits into high-level mentorship, coaching, mastermind events. I angel invested in an early stage tech startup, Series A, because I thought, hey, if this is a 10 or 100x, fucking great. I don't know, it could be. It's definitely worth rolling the dice on. I invested in a podcasting studio, which I thought made good sense. I reinvested a lot back into the business with different projects and different contractors, and I had around 7 team members in 2022. And during that time, expenses were still quite high. Then towards the end of that year, I bought land, and I really wanted to focus on maximizing the profitability of the business. So I switched gears from growth mode into profit mode in 2023, cut back on expenses, had 3 team members, and I put as much of it as I could into building 2 3-story, 3-bedroom houses with swimming pools, saunas, cold plunges, etc. Because I kind of got to the point where I realized that no matter what I did with funnels and experiments and the million different things that I tested, that I wasn't ever going to get the business to a point where it could really run without me. And I knew that I was running out of steam and I was in my last leg of my promise to myself. And I was like, okay, I don't see this turning around. And so the one thing that I know that is like a guarantee is real estate. And so I'm going to build my own houses and I'm going to develop my own project so that I can have this nest egg of safety for myself. And then if I have these houses, then they'll produce passive income, right? And then ideally I can have as much of that as possible. And then I'm kind of free. So I just made the last payment on the second house last week. I still need to pay for the fit out and the furniture, but the build is completely paid off. And after a lot of self-scrutiny and deliberation, and this is now how I'm choosing to look at it. Rather than seeing myself as a failed entrepreneur or as a coach or a business owner who built a business that was unsustainable, or as someone that couldn't figure out how to remove myself from the business, last and surely but not least, is the emotional side. So I just came back from Sydney on a girls' trip with one of my best friends. And we had a really powerful conversation on the last night where something popped for me that has been swirling around in my consciousness for the last couple of years. It was so ready to pop. It was insane. Amidst a lot of the questioning and wondering if, I'd done the right thing and, maybe I regret some of the decisions that I've made. Maybe I regret spending some of the money and some of the investments. Maybe I shouldn't have spent $100,000 on that mentor, or maybe I shouldn't have spent, this amount of money investing in that business, or, I'd have more money in my pocket right now, right? And just thinking about it purely from a financial perspective, there was also a really important part of this journey, which was that there was a part of me, there was a little girl who wanted to feel like she had made it. And what I realized the other night through some really powerful coaching and therapy is that all of the decisions that I made over the last couple of years were so intentional, especially over the last 2 years in particular, last 2.5. I wasn't just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what would happen. I wasn't acting unconsciously or unintentionally I was so considered in every single thing that I did. I weigh up decisions very carefully and with a lot of time, talking to a lot of different people. I meditate a lot, I journal a lot, I really reflect on everything that I do. So there's no way that I could have any regret when I put that much effort into decision making. And I needed to go on that journey. I needed to spend the money that I spent and invest in the things that I invested in. Because what the last 4.5 years gave me, what this particular business journey gave me, was something that you can't put a price on. And that was the feeling that I had created success in a career. Even if it wasn't the exact career, of my dreams as a creative, I did all of the things that I really wanted to do in that industry. And I gave that little girl all of the things that she really wanted to experience and all of the things that, someone who grew up very poor never would have been able to experience. And it was really important that I did that for myself. Because I don't know if I'll ever be able to do a lot of those things again. But the fact that I spent a good couple of months giving myself the things that I always wanted and saying, hey, you get to experience this. You get to have this. You've earned it. You've worked really, really hard for this. That is something that you can't put a price on. This is now my perspective. As a writer, filmmaker, at the age of 31, I'm coming back onto the main road after a 4.5-year detour in business country, where I was able to secure enough resources, network, and opportunity to semi-retire and work part-time while I primarily focus on creating the art that I've always dreamed of making. And when I think about it that way, I feel a lot more calm and at home and proud of myself, because that is quite an accomplishment.